Hey everybody! I chose to write on chapter 8 for my guest lecture, and this chapter is entitled The Biblical Argument for Marriage Equality. As you can see and hear by the title, that this chapter and the argument of this chapter is about same-sex relationships and marriages. In Vine's opinion, there's no difference between an opposite-sex couple when it comes to getting married as a same-sex. He expresses that marriage should be about the covenant that reflects Christ and not about the gender of the people who are in the covenant relationship. So that's kind of the summary of the chapter. He writes, because God's love is boundless, ours should be as well. That means marriage isn't at its deepest level just about our happiness and fulfillment. At its core, marriage is also about displaying the nature of the glory of God through the covenant we make and keep with our spouses. So that's that kind of overview of the book, or this chapter, I mean. I would say that Vines breaks down his argument into three major ideas: the call to procreate, gender differences, and lastly, one flesh or the covenant marriage. So his first argument is the call to procreate. Vines writes, in Jesus' understanding of marriage, covenantal commitment is foundational. The ability to have children is not. So he's saying here that having children is not essential for marriage, to have especially to have a covenant a marriage. He talks about in the book it's more important in the Old Testament than it is in the New Testament and in our current culture. Second, gender differences. Vine also believes that the different gender in marriages holds no ground to having to being the only people, so that all different kind of sexes, whether different or the same, can be married. He writes, the Bible gives us no reason to think that gender difference is the specific difference that's necessary to illustrate Christ's covenantal love for the church. And then he goes on to say at a different point, sexual mechanics for two men and two women vary from what transpires between a man and a woman, but the strength of the resulting bond can be the same. So that's his argument for that. And lastly, his argument, third point would be one flesh/marriage covenant. And Vines believes that this is the most important part, is the covenant itself, and that it doesn't matter the genders, they can be in this one flesh relationship. So Vine writes, what seems to me to be the most important in marriage is not whether the partners are anatomically different from one another, it's whether the inherently different people involved are willing to keep covenant with each other in a relationship of mutual self-giving. He also says the essence of Christian marriage involves keeping covenant with one spouse in a relationship of mutual self-giving. That picture doesn't exclude same-sex couples. So that's his thought. If we look at the other side of the coin, and there's so much more that we can look at than what we have time for today, but we're going to combine that first and second point together, the call to procreate and the gender differences. So first, the call to procreate, I do agree with what Vine is saying, that procreation is not the most important thing to marriage. And I have seen many godly couples who can't have children. Additionally, I agree that same-sex couples can have an emotional bond. Same-sex couples can have an emotional bond the way the opposite sex couples can. And there are many people who are spiritual parents without being physical parents. However, we can't look past the fact that God made man and woman in a specific way, and that them coming together is what produces life. This is the same for humans. This is the same for animals. God created this specifically Before sin entered the world, God had a perfect design for procreation through a godly marriage. Um, and that was part of what it looked like, was this man and woman joining together. And we can't just throw that aside because it seems unimportant or irrelevant or because we don't like it. Um, Not only are man and woman's bodies physically different and meant to be together to create that one flesh, but God also made men and women in a different, unique way from each other that have specific roles and responsibilities that the other gender could not fulfill. Lastly, the marriage covenant or one flesh, although it seems like Vine's making good defenses for his argument, he's kind of sneaky because what he says what the Bible doesn't say, but he doesn't give us really what the Bible actually says. So, for example, he's trying to discredit Ephesians, but Ephesians clearly states that man and woman should be united. We can't just change scripture to the way we want it to say. We need to obey what it actually does say. God's design for marriage and gender was purposeful. God made man and woman to be called and to be joined together. He was intentional to give man a helper made from his rib that was a woman, and it wasn't good for him to be alone, and so he gave this woman. These are all things that God could have done differently if he wanted to. He could have made two males or two females in his original design, but he didn't. He was intentional with what he did. So there's so much more we can talk about this topic, so much deeper we can dig theologically, but for the sake of time, we're going to end here. Before I leave, though, my two questions are: God and the Gay Christian was written in 2014. So how do you think Vines would respond differently or the same now, 10 years later, that the LGBTQ plus movement has grown so much? And additionally, where do you think the church is headed in with tolerance to same-sex marriage and transgender marriages? These questions will be posted as well in the discussion post. All right, thank you.